So
it seems to me that the collectivist thinking that's at work in the insistence that only the group matters has the effect of radically annihilating the integrity of the individual. In fact, that may be even its essence.
Well, I think it's its aim, actually.
That is its aim.
I believe so. At the bottom, like, and because there's a murderousness at the bottom of the collectivism that needs to be accounted for, and so I see what's at the bottom, and this is partly consequence, say, of the insistence that the West is a patriarchal tyranny. The desire it's the Cain and Abel desire. See, Cain was jealous of Abel, not so much because Abel was God's favorite, but because Abel deserved to be God's favorite, because he had done things right. And it's very bitter in life to see a gap widening between you and someone else, period. But it's particularly bitter if you know the gap is widening because the person who is doing well is actually doing good and doing well. And that implies, at least in eradicating the vagaries and randomness of life, and I'm perfectly aware of those as factors. It's bad enough to be down, but it's worse to know that you're down because you've put yourself down. And then you have a choice, which is, do you turn against the ideal itself because it becomes so painful to gaze upon it, or do you destroy the ideal out of vengeance and spite? And that's a simpler pathway forward than decomposing and deconstructing yourself and being reborn. The Christian idea, for lack of a better word, is that something has to be sacrificed in order for the potential of the future to be manifest in the best possible way. There's always a demand for sacrifice. The question is, what should be sacrificed? And the answer is, you. That's the answer. It's you that should be sacrificed. And then the question is, well, what part of you? And the answer to that is, well, the part of you that's not worthy. That needs to be put into the flame. That needs to be burnt off. And that's a process of death and rebirth. And if there's lots of you that has become corrupt, then most of what passes through the fire will be burnt off, and that's terribly painful for people. That's the desert, you know. Imagine that your essential personality structure is tyrannical. So you're a rigid ideologue, you're cast in stone. And so you decide to move from the tyranny, you escape from the tyranny. Well, where do you end up? Well, you don't end up in the promised land. You end up in the desert for 40 years, and maybe you die there. I mean, even Moses did. So it's out of the frying pan into the fire, that's for sure. And it's no wonder that people are loath to let go. And then the more tyrannical they've become, the more they've restricted their possibility and all of that, and sold their soul to the dogma of human beings, let's say, as Solzhenitsyn would describe it, the less there is of them that will be left after everything is stripped bare. And that's a terrifying possibility. It's much easier to take the other route, and it becomes easier and easier. And then, well, there are other motivations that pile up as well, like bitterness, the hatred that bitterness can, because you know you've lost your chance, right? You had your chance, and you've squandered it. And the feeling of that, I think that's why Cain tells God after he gets caught, after his murderous act, he says that his punishment is more than he can bear. Because it's the realization of what he's done. He's destroyed his own ideal. And that's what you do if you're a collectivist. You destroy yourself as an individual. And that's all you have. And so there's nothing in that except, I would say, a continually opening pit of hopelessness and despair. And then that drives bitterness and hatred and desire for revenge and all of that. It's a terrible cycle. And we've seen it play itself out over and over. And we haven't yet precisely learned from that. So to me, it's part of an eternal struggle. You know, it's been outlined as a war in some sense that's going on in the human psyche since the beginning of time for all intents and purposes.